Welcome everyone. Thanks for coming. So this is the third in the series that Jay's given on Blockchain Ask Me Anything. And you can watch the other two videos on our YouTube account, which is FinTech Silicon Valley, or FinTech SV1, I think, on YouTube. So I wanted to, first of all, introduce Daniel Clopey. He's actually a patent attorney.
I am.
And he's been kind enough to host tonight's event, and he's just going to have a few words. We're very grateful to Shepherd Mullen because they've been actually sponsoring our events for over a year and have been incredibly supportive, helping us grow this ecosystem. Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you very much, Miriam. I appreciate it. I'm just going to take a few moments to say thank you so much for coming. The blockchain series, cryptocurrencies, we believe, like many of you out in the audience believe, that it's going to change the world. And it's going to change the world in a way none of us understand or believe it will. I'm confident of that, is that the changes that will happen 5, 10 years from now will probably be a complete surprise to all of us. Regardless of the regulations that we might see, regardless of what people may be trying to control, it's going to have a life of its own. What blockchain is able to do by providing a secure, distributed ledger, the way cryptocurrencies are able to be both utility and a currency, is a remarkable thing, and it's exciting to be a part of it at the very inception. One of the reasons I'm excited about being here at Shepherd Mullen is I get to be an engineer and I get to be a lawyer. And as an intellectual property attorney, it gives me a chance to work with engineers and people like Jay from the very beginning, and I get to see things grow and I get to be a part of it. We have a really nice team here, both on the finance level with securities as well as the engineering. So we have a great team for these kinds of technologies. It's exciting to be a part of it. I'm so glad you came. I'm looking forward to today's presentation. I'm looking forward to the presentations over the next 5 years to see where this goes. Thank you so much.
So someone said to me the other day that there's so many blockchain crypto conferences and events in town at the moment, and that they're often a vaguely hidden advertisement for a law firm. And I have to say that it's totally opposite here at Shepherd Mullen. That in fact, sometimes I even forget to thank people, which is dreadful. But they're never in your face, and they really are great people. I've never found a law firm that I feel like I could trust the people there. So thanks again.
Thank you.
Now I want to turn it over to Jay, who's the most important person tonight, and he's going to take it.
All right, well, thanks everybody, and thanks for hosting the event, and thank you, Timo, for organizing it. So last two sessions, I covered sort of the basic foundational knowledge for cryptocurrency. So I've already covered how it works, what it does, what it solves, and what it doesn't do. So on today's session, I'm going to be talking about sort of what actually everybody's interested in. So there's a financial element to it, there's mining, there's all of that. So who are the stakeholders? So first thing is, I'm sure I wrote this wrong, so I need a legal scholars to tell me that I wrote this wrong. But please, I'm just trying to help. Don't take this as a financial advice and so on and so forth. There are only 2 diagrams, and enjoy. Okay, so stakeholders. There are different types of stakeholders, holders and users. They're all of us. Hopefully, everybody here holds a little bit of cryptocurrency. And secondly, there are vendors and payment processors who use the cryptocurrency or receives it and sends some physical good or digital goods. There are miners, mining pools, mining equipment manufacturers, and these are the people who will give you the mining pick, so to speak, to make sure that you can validate the transactions and you get rewarded for it. And I'll cover all of that. And finally, there are exchanges. And there's a really important group of people that I didn't cover here, and that is the developers. And I'll cover that in the last section where we talk about the present state of cryptocurrency and the future of cryptocurrency. Okay, so vendors and payment processors. So there are different classes of these people. The first thing is that there are decentralized marketplaces like OpenBazaar. Basically, OpenBazaar is a platform where you can set up shops, shop fronts like, say, eBay. Except unlike eBay, these are totally decentralized. So there is no centralized server where these things are being held. And as a payment component of it, they let the visitors to these sites pay in cryptocurrencies. And there are traditional e-commerce integration like Overstock. They take Bitcoin, and then the escrow and reputation system, which is sort of missing link of cryptocurrency because it solves the clearance of the transaction, but it doesn't solve the physical delivery of goods. And you need that because at some point you have to give them the money, or someone has to, give you the goods, right? So there's always that period of uncertainty where who has what. There are pay card companies that deal with cryptocurrencies in a very traditional way where you deposit cryptocurrency, they turn it into fiat, and then you have fiat to spend on your debit card. There are micro tipping platforms where you can tip creators of content by using things like, I'll say, Labs, which is a Lightning Network apps, where you can pay a very small denomination of Bitcoin. There are MetaMask, which is a web integration for Ethereum wallet, and you can sort of like pay using Ethereum, you can store various different ERC20 tokens. There are WooCommerce plugin. Not too familiar with it, to be honest with you. Lastly, there are merchant and peer payment, next to last, where they are trying to actually integrate into the rest of the society, where they need some way to enable merchants to receive and process cryptocurrencies. And these are Omisego, Metal, which is a company I work for as a disclaimer, and Coinbase. So those are some of the companies. And lastly, we have content monetization and ad network. So the problem with ad network right now is that it's very centralized in some ways and it's very scattered and fragmented in other. So for an example, your cookie data is passed on from one entity to another by virtue of open exchange for the ad network participants. But at the same time, there is, on the flip side, you have entities like YouTube where monetization is completely centralized, where they control your content, whether it gets shown, whether it gets monetized. So flipping that on its head, Brave browser and BAT is sort of the different take on it, where you can give microtransaction to a content creator and so on and so forth. Interesting model. So that's all fine and good, but how does any of this transaction get verified? So in most of the cryptocurrencies where proof of work is used, and if you don't understand the term, please let me know and I'll cover all of that. And if you have a question at any time, please raise your hand. And the format is, I want this to be a very open dialogue. So what are the miners? So miners are supposed to validate a block of transaction records. And they do this by having listening to transaction record broadcast. And then they take that and they organize it in time-ordered way. And then they make it into a block. And then they take that, what's called a digest, and they run it through a function, and you get a certain signature of the digest. And in proof of work scheme, for an example for Bitcoin, you need to solve that problem to have a very specific signature with 60 zeros in the front of the resulting hash, so to speak. If that doesn't make any sense, bear with me, I'll cover that as well. But so miners are people who have equipment that run full node software that solve these block problems, and then they get rewarded for it. In most cases, the cryptocurrencies have a built-in mechanism to reward people who validate transactions. So instead of having centralized authority validating transactions and subtracting balance from one and giving it to another, you have these people saying, okay, well, yeah, they look correct. This is a signature of the transaction record, and these are the people who are supposed to be, sending it from and receiving it to, and so on and so forth. And so going to heart of the matter, miners generally run open source miners. So they have either GPU accelerated a way to do it, or they have ASICs miners. And ASICs is application specific hardware. So think of it like it's designed specifically to solve a certain problem, and it doesn't do anything else. It just does it very well. Whereas GPU is more generic. It's actually for gaming, right? But lately, massive parallelization that gaming required is also very useful for solving cryptocurrency problems. And I'll cover that a little bit. So mining softwares sometimes have like built-in rewards, and like something like 1% or 0.5%, whatever it is. So you should be on the lookout for that. And ultimately, miners, if you are just mining for yourself, chances of you earning full reward is very low. It's statistically very low. You may earn it in some distant future, but you as a single entity earning that full reward is very low right now. So then what you do is you group with other people and you essentially divide up the rewards, but solve different problems to get to that reward. And by the way, please, if you download anything binary, I would be very wary of it. So can everybody see this? Is this too small? I'll cover one of them, every single one of them. So ASIC miner vendors, like say, there are 2 or 3 main ones, and they sell ASIC miners in batches. And so what they do is they don't, their claim is that they don't know the exact demand, and therefore they can only create certain number of them. And so you have to pre-order, and after 1 to 3 months period, when they have all of the infrastructure to be able to make it and get it ready to be shipped, that's when you get it. So when you actually purchase it, you don't get it right away. It's not like you go to Amazon and say, okay, well, give me a ASIC miner that has like however many gigahashes or whatever, right? You actually have to wait 2 or 3 months. And so when you do that, let's say you're a miner and you're a commercial miner, right? Or at least you're raising money to be a commercial miner. Then what do? You have to do a net present value analysis, basically, comparing it to like, look, what if I did something else with it? Is it better than buying a miner? And you have to do a very minimal of a revenue modeling. And what you would have to do is you would have to, and most miners miss this. Cryptocurrencies have variant reward, and it also has variant difficulty. And difficulty is an important factor because difficulty is a variable that increases or decreases based on the network hash power. So if there are more people mining, it's harder to solve the same problem, and therefore you may not be getting the reward that you expect. So consider the following scenario. Let's say that cryptocurrency price shot up through the roof, and because of that, people started buying the miners for it. It's fine if the price continues to rise, but let's say that price falls, then you're suddenly in a loss-making business, and the difficulty because of the mad onrush to be the miner that claims the reward. There are more entrants in the system, and therefore you get difficulty goes up, and you get less reward, proportionally speaking. So you should think about that before purchase, as well as what happens during the operation. And next thing is you should run. And this is an embarrassingly simple example, of course. You should run some sort of a price simulation. I wrote Monte Carlo simulation of coin price. It's basically like random walk, right? And then basically Monte Carlo simulation, you take a historical volatility and you use that as an input to create sort of like a random price fluctuation, and you use that as an input to a operating revenue model. You can get very sophisticated with this, and I'm sure audience here is smarter than I am, so let me know if you come up with a really good way. And next thing is, but question is, look, is historical volatility really useful at all in a coin that is in a price discovery phase? Like any speculative asset class, you have some sort of like period in which no one knows the exact outcome, right? Like, or the future expectation, or what it should do. Like a pink sheet stocks, for an example, those are speculative stocks. And some of them do very well, and a lot of them do very poorly. So when you build a revenue model based on a historical volatility, is that really useful? I don't think so, but if you, please talk to me if you have a better take on it. And there's also fixed cost, which is sort of the operating cost due to paying for the electricity. So what happens is when you're running these miners, these are very expensive to run in terms of power consumption in most cases. So you should think of that before you jump head in. And lastly, please be very careful when you look at Alibaba listings for like cheap A6 miners or whatever it is. A lot of times those are not worth the money. Sometimes they sell bricked or almost inoperable A6 miners, and if you buy them, you're just throwing money away. But as an individual miner, like it could take you 10 years to actually get a full reward, or you could possibly never get one. So, but there's this sort of like statistical certainty if you have a lot of participants in the system. So let's say that every one of us are solving same problem in a different way, and we share the winning and we distribute the earnings, right? Then that's a reasonable problem. You can get some small amount of reward in a reasonable time period. So what normally people do is they join what's called a mining pool, and they have proportional reward split. And but the downside to that is, well, and it's a mixed bag. So miners don't generally connect directly to the network, so they have to go through the mining pool's gateway, or the sort of like handler that dispatches work to individual mining software that's connected to. And it looks like this. It's a very simple diagram. And basically you have cryptocurrency network that broadcasts or the transaction records and receives a potential solutions to those transaction blocks. And what happens is you have mining pools that basically take those transaction records and say, okay, well, I want this miner to solve the problem this way. I want you to solve this problem this way, and so on and so forth. That's a really grossly simplified way of looking at it, but that's what it is. Next thing is, so then who are these people? People who are operating mining pools, who are these people? There's a different way to look at it. They're people like you and me. They're running a business like any other people, and they take a little chunk of the earnings, like a percent or two, for every reward block. And how they operate is that they generally operate as a company, and they also have some governance functionality. So, for example, Bitcoin has a certain protocol. Like when you transmit a message, it has to conform to certain rules, right? And every once in a while, the developers have to change the protocol to make it better, or to scale it, or so and so forth, right? And so then what happens is they go through this long discussion phase and proof of concept phase, and then what ends up happening is there are two main stakeholders. One is the developers who's saying, okay, well, we got to change the protocol, and then two, there are mining pools or miners who have to accept those protocols, or at least the mining portion of the protocol. So mining pools, by virtue of their size and sort of this like syndicalist view of the world, which is everybody pull their resources together and then you get a little bit of reward. They have some say in how the protocols turn out. So they can broadcast their willingness or unwillingness to change proposals, and they often act with the delegated authority of people who are involved.
I have a question. question.
Yeah, sure.
So is a mining pool a piece of software that runs on a computer somewhere?
Yeah, it's actually both. So you have to your mining software that I covered earlier, like GPU miners or ASICs mining software. They generally are a sub part of the full software. So Bitcoin, for example, if you check out their code, it's a full node, and the mining part of the software is a small portion of it. Generally, what people do then is they write like something that interfaces with your graphics card, something like CUDA, and then they jam it together so that it can take advantage of the graphics card to do the processing faster, but also it uses what's called a Stratum network protocol, which then connects to other miners, and generally how you connect to a mining pool is through that Stratum protocol. So it's a little different.
So the miners, do they run the same software that the mining pool run, or are they similar in the sense that they run part of it?
That's a great question. So software doesn't have to be exactly the same, because all you care about is how it comes out on when you transmit the message, right? So as long as like internal working can be very different, but as long as you solve it somehow and then you transmit the message in a predictable format, that's all Bitcoin network cares about.
And they follow the protocol.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So
Thanks.
there are differences in how it's. Yeah.
So what happens if two miners solve the problem at the same time? Who
Right.
gets reward?
So there's so that's a good question. So what happens? One is that it's almost impossible for the validation. So what happens is when miner solves a problem, they have to miner has to broadcast it to Bitcoin network to be verified by some of the full nodes, and then get the reward. So it almost never happens that both of them get the same verification at the same time.
But it's software, they have to take care of that contingency. What
Yeah,
happens if it happens?
So there are some like ways to handle like in terms that sort of things happen. I think it's handled by like the oldest transaction records. There's also a thing called coin age. But basically there is a transaction ID that is that's monotonically increasing, and then there's the coin age, which is older coins get handled first. There's a like underlying rules that settle like in cases where there are contention, where it's like timestamp is exactly the same for the solution. Then what happens? I think there's an internal. It looks at the block inside and then like it resolves it that way. That's my understanding of it. All right. Okay. So yeah, and newer pools are generally more risky. Like with anything, if you have a startup and you have no idea who these people are, probably they might just do a big exit scam.
Sorry to slow you down so much. But
Sure.
If each miner is permitted to run their own code, probably what's stopping them from like not sending their solution when they arrive at it to the pool and instead directly claiming it themselves?
It's more of a reputation, because it's like with any other business, you want repeat customers, right? So like if the mining pool suddenly stops giving out rewards, then people who are in the mining pool will get suspicious and they might just move. And it's actually very easy to change Stratum, the IP address it points to. All you have to do is like change one thing, and now the miners can go to somewhere else. So there's nothing that locks the miners into a mining pool. So it cuts down to the essence of free market. You need to be a good faith actor, or you're not going to be a long-term player in the game if you just scam somebody. All right, I'm going to move on to the next one. So cloud mining. So some people have gotten together and say, well, I don't want to buy any hardware, so I want someone else to take care of the infrastructure. I just want to buy a contract and have some remote mining location in Siberia or Iceland, and I want them to take care of like server management. Yeah, you can do that, but it's also a business for cloud mining people. they operate these facilities and they figured out how to make money off of it. So most likely, like profit margin is going to be very slim because of it. And they also have a lot of like contingencies where they can just terminate the contract at any time or whatever it is. So read it very, very carefully. Like with anything, please be careful. All right, so I'm going to talk about exchanges, and this is how you get fiat and convert it into crypto, or vice versa, or just crypto to crypto. And surprisingly, a lot of these features that I'm going to be talking about in crypto exchange context is exactly the same if you talk about traditional finance. So if you talk about equities or options or whatever, they're very similar. So only thing that's different is that in crypto space that there are possibility of having a decentralized exchange system. So where in the traditional finance, equity space, you have sort of like what's called a dealer broker network, and then they're connected to the exchanges by electronic trading network. You have dark pools that sort of serves only the buy side, and you have all these like substructures that are built on top of each other over a very long period of time. The difference in crypto is that they started with exchanges and just basically said, okay, well, here, connect to exchange directly instead of going through a broker. But I'm going to be mostly focusing on centralized portion of it because there are a lot of security, information, and also like as a user of an exchange, you might get something out of it. Some exchanges have margin trading, of course, like you can borrow money to trade, and some have different levels of KYC AML, which is know your customer and anti-money laundering. Like if you're just trading crypto, some don't even care who you are. You just put an email address and that's it. In other jurisdictions, they do care. If you're trading any kind of actual like fiat or sovereign currency into a cryptocurrency, you do have to provide identity. In most cases, they're more severe than regular equity trading, which is surprising to me. But there are custodial risks, like with anything. If you entrust the money to somebody else, and you don't own that money anymore. It's in someone else's hand, and they can do whatever they want with it. Generally, institutions have reputations to uphold, and they're not just going to steal your money. Although those things do happen every once in a while. Now, so that's from outside and exit scam from inside sort of scenario, right? You have to be very careful. And I'm going to be covering both of them in a little bit, but in the context of network security. And if you are interested in sort of like how these exchanges fail, you can go look at this website, and they have a list of just like numbers of exchanges, and they are very like they're scary. I mean, please take a look at it. So, with margin trading and derivatives, you have makings of a giant financial bubble, but at the same time, you have also mechanisms to trade volatility well. And there are futures already for Bitcoin, and there are swaps in some cases, and there are options as well. So you can actually do these sort of volatility plays very well. And lastly, next to last, exchanges have different fee structures, and there are things like maker and taker fees, so you should really look into it. Some places, and what makers and takers are basically makers of liquidity and takers of liquidity. What that means is if you put order up, someone to take, like let's say you're a lemonade vendor, right? And you put lemonade on the stand, you're creating liquidity. If you are a buyer of that lemonade, you're a taker. You're taking away lemonade from someone else to partake in. So similarly with any financial instruments, you are either a provider of liquidity or you're a taker of liquidity. And the fee structure is different for your status. So let's say you put a sell order for what you already own, then you're providing liquidity for buy side, and therefore you're going to incur less fee because exchanges generally want people to provide liquidity. Okay, so moving on. For crediting. Okay, so cryptocurrencies are codes, right? And pieces of code that have certain lineage of history, and they can be forked at any given time. If they're open source, and they generally are, there's no guard against someone forking your cryptocurrency code. And Bitcoin has happened. And Bitcoin has that happened to it very many times, and a lot of people actually get a lot out of it because people think, okay, well, this is going to stick around and whatever else. Generally, they don't, but one can only hope. So people do trade them, and some exchanges credit forks in different ways. So one thing is that there are exchanges that credit forks by creating a financial derivative. So for an example, they create token of their own and say, okay, well, Bitcoin is going to fork at this block number. We know that's going to happen in a month, and therefore we're going to already provide you with a financial derivative for you to trade that fork. And then come settlement time, then you know exactly what it's worth. So you can actually trade forks even before it happens. Alternatively, exchanges can just give you the forked tokens at the date of the time when the coins are made available, because they're basically two different source codes, right? And because there are two different, they operate under two different rules, they have two different coins. So one day you have one Bitcoin, next day you have one Bitcoin and something else. Happens a lot. Some exchanges don't credit them, so you might want to look into that. Like, what is the history of their fork credit? Because it is your money. I mean, whether I like cryptocurrencies being forked or not is really none of exchanges' business. It's not something that they should be defining how you take possession of it. So I encourage you to look into that.
I don't think I quite got it.
Sure.
What happens, let's say I have a Bitcoin.
Yeah.
And what is happening with that?
Okay, so Bitcoin has some. If you go to GitHub, there's a source code of a Bitcoin, right?
Mhm.
And let's say that there are disagreements in development team or stakeholders, and then they now suddenly have two copies of Bitcoin source code, right? So that's called forking. And when you have forked
Is that
code,
going to change my idea of my Bitcoin?
no, so not really. So the old, generally, if they do the fork responsibly, they have two different currencies. So the old currency and the new currency.
Or the new currency that's going to be generated?
That's right. And then in most cases, if you already had money in the old currency, you'll have equivalent unit number in the new currency. So that's what's called fork. Cryptocurrency forking. There are different kinds of fork. So one where it doesn't involve creating maintainable currency on the new one, where they just let the old one die. They never, they just say, okay, well, don't use that and use a new one. In other cases, you have rogue, agencies where they create their own fork and then they release it.
So will the wallets that I have, will they adjust to it automatically?
You'll have to have a new wallet because they operate under different rules now, because they created two different cryptocurrency, and they probably have some different ways in which the protocol handles your cryptocurrency or the new one. So which means that you need a new wallet. And if you're technically savvy, you can go to the new forked source code and build a wallet yourself, and then enter in the wallet address that you had before with a private key, and there you go. You have a new cryptocurrency. Alternatively, if you had money in exchanges and they credit you the forked amount, let's say I had Bitcoin in one exchange, and then there was a fork of a Bitcoin at some point. Some exchanges will give you the currencies by handling it themselves. They'll just credit you.
How often is this forking happening?
Oh, who knows? It's human agency, right? Like anybody can fork codes at any given time. So, it really depends on a couple things. One is how cohesive the development team is, and how cohesive the community around cryptocurrency in question is, and if there's a sort of split or schism in way that they think it should be going, development process should be going, then they generally for. Or it's just pure money grab. Some people just say, well, Bitcoin is worth 10,000. I'm going to make something called Bitcoin J and then market it, and now it's a $200 Bitcoin, and people are going to buy it because it has Bitcoin in it. So sometimes it's a money grab. Sometimes
I'm
there's a,
still confused about this. So let's
Sure.
say somebody forked and they said, okay, it's 10, for each Bitcoin, I'm going to
Yeah.
create 10 Bitcoin J's.
Yeah.
So would I have an option to either keep the original Bitcoin?
No, you have so if you were technically savvy and you built the wallet from source code of both, you already have both actually. You have
So
one
has my
Bitcoin.
money doubled?
Yeah, technically, but then it says nothing about the market value of the new coin, right? Like I could fork the coin at any given time, but it could be worth 0 because you might not want it.
There's a lot of scammers out there.
Absolutely, and that's what's so great about it.
So that's where you're in the lawyer.
No. So well, okay. So I joke, but it's great. It's great because it brings to surface sort of like what we already take for granted. What we already take for granted, which is, are scams happening under our nose and we just don't know about it, or are they more prevalent? And truth will tell. I mean, time will tell. But I think there are more under our nose that we don't know about. Okay, so which kind of Bitcoin is a mirror to our financial soul, so to speak. All right. Okay, so exchanges. So there are some questions that you want to ask, and these are the terms that you might be interested in, you might not be. They're in no particular order of importance. So when you submit an order and they get executed, and by executed, what it means is it's matching the order, sell order to buy order, and then it's clearing that order, right? So in exchanges have different order execution priority. So the exchanges that are open and that are good and they're reputable, they generally publish how they settle those orders, and you should look that up. The exchanges that are not so reputable may just don't tell you how they settle orders. So that might be something to look for. Does the exchange have circuit breakers? And this is a big subject because you guys heard about like flash crash and like how people lost and won big money, and those are all due to some evil algo traders and all that stuff. Well, part of it is true, but like with anything like train wrecks and car wrecks, it's less of a malfeasance than a runaway disaster. Like the disaster that they themselves get killed or they themselves get maimed only because they were driving recklessly, not intending to kill people. So like with anything, and so what is circuit breakers? So circuit breakers are exchange mechanisms that are built in to sort of stem the tide, so to speak. So when there's a huge wave of people trying to sell something, and there's just no bottom, like no one wants to buy, and just keeps on falling and falling and falling. And there was a recent Ethereum flash crash that went to like almost nothing before it came all the way back up to what it started at. So and exchanges can kind of be a mediating force in that sense by providing mechanisms where look, if there are certain percentage of price drops in a very simplistic way within a certain time period, just stop the trade altogether. But free market diehard free marketer that I am, maybe that's not so a good solution. I don't know. It really depends. What is, and it goes down to sort of like what I said earlier, which is what is capitalism? What is a proper role of organization that's supposed to facilitate trade? Is it to provide price discovery role, or is it to provide well-regulated market? So that sort of goes back to our question, like things that we take for granted. And and exchanges generally that operate with a margin, they also have rules where look, if a position moved against you, so much that you're going to lose your account anyways. We're going to liquidate that position on your behalf, and so that the counterparty, which is the exchange, also doesn't, or the lender of the monies used for margin trading also don't lose their shirt. So they have to liquidate your position. Like if you are a trader worth your salt, and it has happened to you at least once. And so is it auto liquidation or is it a margin call? Margin call is sort of like the company calls you and say, look, you're underwater. We're going to sell your position unless you deposit more money, or if it's a very ruthless algorithmic way of doing it, they'll just liquidate you, and if it goes below a certain percentage. And front running is unethical thing, but also at the same time, different. Most people don't talk about it, and jurisdictions have different rules around it. And I'll cover front running more in detail later. Basically, it's retail traders submit an order, and then that gets aggregated. But there are some in between entities that can peak your order and then put orders on opposite side of yours, and thereby making that little tiny bit of money, and then they can just keep going at it. So does the exchange offer deep order book? And order book is sort of like your map of the orders like that are out there. So it tells you how what kind of market regime you're operating under. Like for example, how many people want certain thing at a certain price as opposed to close to par price. So if you look at the exchange order book, you'll see like bids at certain price. There are so many units of certain financial instrument being wanted at that price, as opposed to so many being wanted to be sold at the price. So you generally have near book visibility as a retail trader, but as you get, you may want to see like how far it extends, like who's putting buy orders so low, who's putting sell orders so high, and Nasdaq, like if you trade on brokers that also route orders to Nasdaq, you can actually get deeper and deeper order book. But I don't know if cryptocurrencies they offer that kind of service where you have different tiered API accesses.
GDEX is the biggest still, right?
Yeah, GDEX is pretty large by volume. But internationally, GDEX is GDEX isn't the dominant player internationally. So there are other exchanges. Now, this is a really simplified view of deposit and withdrawal mechanism that exchanges have. I'm sure I messed something up, so please just take it with a grain of salt. So, client, that's every one of us, can deposit money in one of three ways generally. You can just deposit the cryptocurrency directly, you can wire the money, you can wire the fiat, or you can buy cryptocurrency using credit card, and they go through a different process. So if you wire the money, it has to go to exchange's bank account, right? And then they can credit the money, so it takes a few days. If you buy it using credit card, they have to go through payment processing, and they have to go ensure that look, you need some sort of margin to make sure that profit margin to make sure that if someone claims fraud, then you don't the exchange doesn't lose out. Now, the exchange account management mechanism generally have account database that's connected to it, but at the same time, for cryptocurrencies, they can't just expose a exchange wallet to a publicly available API where you deposit money, right? Because then everybody knows how much the exchange has everybody's money and all that stuff. And less knowledge the public has, the better in terms of security in financial sense. So then exchanges generally have what's called a hot wallet, where they have algorithmically controlled wallet addresses where when you deposit money, exchange that knows how much money was deposited from whom, and then it credits your account. Hot wallets generally don't have the full reserve of the exchange, the account holders of the exchange that's in the exchange. Generally have fractions, so that look, if someone wants to get their money out in cryptocurrency, they have some available. Like just like with any other bank, you go to a bank and bank has a vault, but vault doesn't have all of the money that that bank has, right? It has a small portion of it, so that in case it gets robbed, they're not gonna lose out everything. And then there's what's called cold storage, and cold storage is basically just very secure way of storing Bitcoin or any other cryptocurrency. They basically have a paper wallet or some other means or a hardware wallet that basically holds all of the the assets of that exchange may have, and they generally are air gapped and they're not connected to the rest of the internet, so that no one can just hack into their system and get all of the gold. Okay, so I covered front running earlier. Generally, some disreputable exchanges will entice retail traders, that's like every one of us, with 0 fee. And basically say, look, you can trade for 0 fees. Okay, that's great. And when you submit an order, what happens? They batch them up and say, okay, either they give the information to a very special privileged party, like institutional investors, or they have their internal traders that can just look at this and say, okay, look, we can just put the order on the other side, make a little bit of money. Of course, that's very unethical. And you should really ask that question. Does a retail trader have same visibility as institutional traders? And that's a harder question to answer because a lot of times there are legitimate functions that institutional traders provide, but in some cases they just take advantage of you. So you should be very careful. Okay, so it's impossible to see this, and so I'm going to read it to you. So this is sort of like my very opinionated view on liquidity and valuation. I know you're here for cryptocurrency, but this is sort of like, cryptocurrency is a new asset, and because of that, a lot of young people have gotten involved, and young at heart have gotten involved, and that's great. But the problem is that, just like with any other asset class or any other financial instrument, there are some fundamental truths in establishing value, and a lot of people miss that, and they also lose money, and that's why you have, sort of what's the P.T. Barnum saying? There's a fool born every second or something like that, and my hope is that this will encourage you to look deeper into the heart of matter and beyond cryptocurrency, and hopefully you'll be a smarter for it. So crypto markets are relatively new. Cryptocurrencies are still in price discovery phase. A lot of them are, and if anybody says they know the future, they're obviously telling you something else. And forward projection is uncertain. You have no idea what what cryptocurrencies are going to do. We don't know. People are still figuring it out. What is it for? What's it good for? Prices are generally set by last trade in exchanges. So when you see that price in CoinMarketCap or whatever, Google Finance or whatever, that's generally just price at the last trade. It doesn't tell you what the weighted average of the price is or anything like that. It's not volume weighted for sure. It's just the last trade. And which sort of skews valuation. Like if there was a crazy event that everybody bought into or sold onto, and there was a freak accident, kind of like a Ethereum flash crash, then it kind of skews the valuation in a one way or the other. Now, which also says something about cryptocurrency, because it's such a speculative asset class. You have a situation where there isn't a person on the other side who wants to buy or sell, which means it's very liquid, comparatively speaking. Like if I have Microsoft, there's always somebody to sell, unless Microsoft really screws up. But if I have some no-name altcoin, there might not be someone on the other side of the trade who wants to buy this thing. So, which means that the small sum of money can move the price relatively and have a high impact, relatively speaking. So I could go to, and it's the same for penny stocks, right? I could go to I could trade penny stocks, and for very small sums of money, I could pump it up, and people do this for a living. Some people do. I don't, but and so there's also like exchange fragmentation. So in traditional equity space, like if we're talking about say different exchanges that are linked together by brokers, they generally you can like route the order from one broker to different exchanges and get the best price, so to speak. And there's some added price that I'll mention it later, but because of that sort of like built-in way to route orders and whatnot, and generally you get pretty good par from exchange to exchange in a regular equity space, but not so in cryptocurrency. You have the price is wildly different in different exchanges. So like Bitcoin price in Korea is completely different than Bitcoin price in India, and it's completely different from Bitcoin price in the United States. But then it's also very difficult to negotiate that what's called exchange arbitrage, where you buy from one, sell it to other, and then hopefully you make profit. Usually it doesn't work that way. It's very operationally, you have to be very exact, and you have to understand how long it takes for money to go across the pond, so to speak. Some people make good living off of it, but I personally find it very challenging. And there are different jurisdictions, so which means that you might not be able to get your cash out of one country after you turned it into a cash. So you should be careful. So where am I? Oh yeah, it's the third one, fourth one. Cryptocurrency exchanges are generally decoupled, which means there's no like substructure that links them in one way or the other. In traditional equity space, you have brokers that are basically acting quote unquote on your behalf to like you can route the order from Arca to Nasdaq to Ireland and so on and so forth. So there are different exchanges and brokers hold your money, but they can route the order in different places. Because you are dealing directly with exchange, exchanges don't generally have inter-exchange links, which is a strange thing, but it works to their advantage. They want home court advantage. They don't want your money to move into a different account system, right? Or get better prices elsewhere. They want your fees. So what's the solution? Adding a layer of broker will definitely add cost. I mean, and the reason for it is that in the traditional equity and finance system, the broker system was built because there were open cry auction, and you were physically barred from entering into exchanges, and you needed a broker to have a dealer on the ground to be able to route your order physically, right? So brokers historically served a useful function in that the exchanges generally barred access to everybody else, and you have no way of getting into it unless you have license, so on and so forth, right? So the thing is that the electronic trading network that was built up over the years are built on top of that sort of like role-based system where brokers are supposed to do this and exchanges are supposed to do that. Now, it's suspect whether that's a really good solution in sort of like something that started with direct access to exchange. Now, of course, if you have a lot of money and you have a hedge fund, you can actually just use what's called direct market access, and you can just send market orders directly through that. It'll take a lot of money, but you can set that up, and you can hire a lot of IT people. But at least in cryptocurrency, you can just connect directly to the exchange, and they sometimes have APIs. So maybe different solution is required. So another thing. Liquidity crunch. So what's liquidity crunch? Liquidity crunch is when all of a sudden there's nobody on the other side of the order. Let's say that there's 100 people wanting to buy something at some price, right? And some event happens and all of them cancel their order, and there's nobody else on the other side of the trade to buy your stuff. Then if you're not patient and you have to sell right away because you either borrowed money to establish a position or whatever it is, then you have to sell it right away. You have to reduce your risk, right? But if there's no one else on the other side, you have to keep lowering the price until somebody wants to buy it. So that's essentially liquidity crunch on in a nutshell. But these are generally human decision led. Like someone made a system to do that, or there's some sort of like news item that led it to happen, right? So it's not like in a gross sense, it's like force of nature, but if in a philosophical sense, it's human agency that makes it happen. So maybe that's one way to think about it. And it's a natural consequence of the market. So when you see prices drop and swing wildly, it's because they're just at a certain point there's nobody to buy and nobody to sell, and that's why you see wild volatility. I talk a lot about prices, and cryptocurrencies are not stocks. There's no like if someone made a currency, it's not a representation of a little piece of tangible asset or intangible asset. It's just currency, right? So which means stocks have what's called a book value, where if the entity went bankrupt, then there's some assets like real estate or whatever, patent or whatever, that they can sell to recoup the losses and give it back to the bondholders. Cryptocurrencies have no such thing. So, I find it funny when people say market cap, because it's not a market capitalization. No one ever says, what's a market cap of US dollar? Have you ever heard that? I mean, if you have, let me know, but I've never heard that. So it again forces you to question notion of what is a currency, what is an asset, what gives a value. Okay, so decentralized exchange. So centralized exchanges have a lot of things it needs a lot of infrastructure, it needs people, it needs customer support, it needs network security, it needs lawyers, it needs which is fine. There's a role for centralized exchanges because you need whenever you deal with fiat and whenever you deal with US dollar and whatever, you need compliance, you need regulation. But when you're dealing with just pure cryptocurrency, I'm just exchanging Dogecoin for something else. Maybe that's a lot of overhead. And so people have come up with the idea of decentralized exchange. How do we then just exchange one unit of cryptocurrency to another different kinds of cryptocurrency? And in some ways, it's no different than if you do like-kind exchanges over real estate. So often for decentralized exchanges are only for a single chain, and what that means is that blockchains have special properties that ensure that you record who has what and now someone else has what, right? And the internal to the blockchain, there is a consistent rule that ensures that there have been a fair exchange between one public address to another public address. That's already built into the cryptocurrency itself. Problem happens when you want to exchange from one cryptocurrency to another because their rules are different, number one. Number two, they're not built to be interoperable. Like the protocols are not supposed to talk to each other. So which means that because rules are different and because the protocols are different and there's no way to ensure trust between two different rule sets, that it's very difficult to have a cross-chain decentralized exchange. Because if you have a centralized exchange, right, then what happens is all you have to do is change the amount that an account holds, right? It's basically an Excel sheet that says, well, Alice owns 10,000 Bitcoin and 5,000 Ethereum. When after she sells it, it just lower the one and increase the other. But the thing is that that's only feasible because there is a central authority that basically says this is now the end state of the ledger after trade. Decentralized exchanges, knowing that the rules are different across the chains, it's very difficult to ensure that happens. And there are other things that makes it different. For example, if you want to do a swap between Bitcoin and Ethereum without centralized exchange, what would you have to do? Someone has to give Bitcoin to one person in hopes that he receives Ethereum from the other person, right? But there is a split moment where, delivery is not guaranteed. Like, the Alice could give to Bob, but then Bob might not want to part ways with her part of the bargain. I mean, his part of the bargain. There are the researches that are underway that will guarantee that happens. Yes.
And what about atomic swap?
Yeah. So that's one of them, right? So atomic swap is when you say, okay, well, you immobilize the money, and then there are some conditional ways under which that money is released. It's very similar to escrow. Now we're going back to the old idea of money, which is natural. Atomic swap is one, but atomic swap also has a lot of look, if you're not tax heavy, you're not gonna do atomic swap. You're just gonna give somebody Bitcoin and trust that they're gonna give you Ethereum. If you're tech savvy, even then it's kind of difficult to set it up. So decentralized exchanges on cross-chain exchange is a little bit difficult. People are trying though. So
We have to finish up.
okay, yeah, I'll go real quick. How many?
A minute?
Minute. Oh, geez. Okay, so order book clarity, broader impact and increasing liquidity. Decentralized exchanges will cover all of that. It's kind of good, but decentralized exchanges, there's no way to inject fiat. So every art and every inquiry, similarly every action and choice is thought to aim at some good, and for this reason, good has rightly been declared to be that which all things aim. That's Aristotle. Very good. And if you want to ask questions about that, I'll cover it. And this is sort of like the current state of cryptocurrency. And I can talk about some of the more esoteric stuff like stablecoin and broader HSM deployments. So that's like the hardware security modules for exchanges so that you're safer. But Satoshi ultimately is a programmer at heart. And there's a future, which is cross-chain exchange, decentralized exchange, practical oracles, and I'll talk about oracles if you want to ask questions about that, and a lot of things. When is the mass adoption ever going to happen? Thank you.